says, oh, okay, this is the book we want to publish because this one has done well for us in New York, right? Now you're having people like us, like you, reading the work. You're not having to explain things to them, right? You're not having to tell them, well, so you're not getting, for instance, you're not getting a comment like, oh, but how come your characters eat pork? Because in Nigeria, people don't eat pork. Now you're getting people like you who understand. So the questions they're going to be asking are much more productive, right? And they're not going to be wasting time on silly questions, right? Yeah.
All right, Nnamdi, you had a question as well.
Okay, so firstly, no, I don't have any particular bias or equivalency. I think where I do have biases, I hide my bias as well, right? My favorite writer from that age is easily by far Soyinka, and if not for this question, I'd have gone through this entire panel without mentioning Soyinka. So I think I kept repeating it because I'm more concerned about, like I said when I was speaking, I'm more concerned about the ecosystem, recognizing the ecosystem in which we create. And creation is not done in isolation, because starting out as a writer, there was a tendency to be very, very isolated in the way you create, because that's the way it's put forward to you. In other art forms, be it like music or film, like you can see the collaboration in process. In writing, not so much, because now we know Achebe. We don't know how many drafts of readings, like how many editors went through it, and even like Wale also mentioned, even the legacy built around it was also helped by the people who reviewed it, who spoke about it, who championed it. And a lot of this isn't done in isolation. And now I feel like the African literary scene, like Chika also mentioned, is evolving. So we have a lot more publishers who are Africans and who understand the narrative more. We have festivals, we have workshops and residencies. And even on social media, there's a space to build a brand as a Nigerian writer in Nigeria. There's a community of people you could share your work with and have conversations around your work. If you put out an essay or a short story, yes, you'll be discussed online, you'll be discussed in group chats, and the feedback would get to you at some point, positive or negative. So, but we are recognizing that there's a community, and that's for me what I'm trying to highlight, that not necessarily having an Achebe of a generation or an Ekwensi of a generation, but having, most importantly, a generation.
Sure. So we had a question on teaching Things Fall Apart, especially on gender and teaching Things Fall Apart.
The American students thinking that that the novel, that the women are abused, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I wanted Helen to answer that, because you teach.
What was the question again?
So it's on teaching. So basically, it's a question about teaching Things Fall Apart, and this idea that it's not a feminist novel, that in fact there are sections of the novel, particularly with female students, that kind of resonate negatively, especially with how the
in America.
Yeah.
Specifically in America. Yes, for context. Yes.
Yeah, it's a complicated novel, and whenever you read it, you discover new things. So the assumption on the surface of it, when you read it, is that it's a book that is talking about this highly masculine, almost toxic, masculine society.
Sure.
That puts so much emphasis on achievement and manliness, and you're not supposed to even be nice to your own children.
Yes.
But then you reread it, and you see that he's also giving space for women in the book. They have power, like the priestess. When Ekwefi was the young girl,
Yes.
And the kind of power that women have in the society, and in the house as well, because they determine basically what you eat and what you do in the house. They have their own farms. It's not just the husband's farm. It's their own. They produce their own food and all that. So there are all these things that the book mentions. I think people sort of expect it to be this kind of, to talk about women in a way that we do today. But he is writing about a certain time in history, and that's what life was at that time, and he had to be true to that time.
Yeah.
But even then, he managed to make women strong. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's sort of like dovetailing into that, right? I think that there's a tendency for us, right, in this day and age, and for American students, right, especially, to read the now,
Yes.
right, into cultures that they don't understand,
Sure.
right, which is sort of a difficult thing to do. It's also an arrogant thing to do, because you don't see that there's a culture outside of your own. So on Wednesday, just before I left, I taught a class, right, and we read a short story by a Chinese woman, translated into English, and she published this short story in 1992. And in the short story, so the culture is also patriarchal, and the mother scolds the son, who thinks he's done something good for the mother, but he's gone about it the wrong way. And so the mother scolds him and then hits him, right? And so one of my students said, well, I don't understand why he just stood there and took the mother's abuse. Which is, and I'm like, and I told this, I said, I read this book I read this story a long time ago in Nigeria, and I wanted you guys to read it because it's one of my favorite short stories. It sort of like stayed with me for a long time. And it never occurred to me to think of the mother slapping the boy as abuse, right? I was thinking, so I said, well, what should he have done? And she said, well, he should have, I expected him to say something to the mother, and I said, sure, okay, Chika. Obviously, it's a different, it's a different context, it's a different, because I'm sure, 50 years ago in America, the switch was still being used, right? So my student's grandmother would read that same story and not have the same, not come to it with the same, not have the same reaction, thank you, not have the same reaction, right? And I also think that what Achebe does in Things Fall Apart is to realistically portray the society as it was back then,
yes.
Which it wasn't all good, and he never says that it was all, people weren't sitting around
singing
Kumbaya. Yeah, he did
yes.
romanticize it, right?
Yes.
And I think that also when we read works, especially African works, right, with the framework of let me say Western feminism or modern feminism, you get into trouble. There's something that Obama Nemeka, who is a scholar and a professor in some American university, came up with years ago, and she calls it nego-feminism, right? Which is short for no ego feminism or negotiated feminism, right? And I think if you read Things Fall Apart, within the framework of negotiated feminism or nego-feminism, you understand that even though these women were living in and patriarchy is never good. I have to watch what I say because Mona is right in front of me. So, patriarchy is never good, but, no, there's no but. There's no but, no. So, but having said that, what Achebe tried to show was a society which, an Igbo society did have that, where women also had their own spaces, right? And those spaces were not always equal to men's spaces,
sure.
Right? And which is why feminism is important, and why nego-feminism doesn't always work,
yes.
Right? But I think American students should learn to read, works, bearing in mind that there's a world outside of America.
Sure.
And also bearing in mind that this is written in a specific culture, specific context. But you can doesn't mean that you can't interrogate it.
Sure.
You can interrogate it, but you should interrogate it from a place of knowledge and respect. And that
of
makes
recognizing that the context.
Which is what I mean by respect, by recognizing that different context, different culture, etc., etc., etc.
And it's also good to also.
That's such a half-hearted clap.
I interrupted. Sorry. Yeah. You have to also. Writers also kind of evolve, and their books kind of move on.
Sure.
So when you read Things Fall Apart, you should also read like The Antis of the Savannah, and look at what Achebe has done in that book.
Precisely.
All right, thank you so much. So we will take our final round of questions. We have a few minutes. So what we're just going to do is really quick questions. Obviously, feel free to punch hard, but really quick questions, please. All right.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Okay.
My name is Michael Chidozim Chukudera. My question is concerning African writers, the issues bordering around the label, being called an African writer. I don't understand it. I've been reading about it for years and years, And I don't understand why some writers are against being called African writers and some writers don't have a problem with it. And well, if I was to say, I would have said, okay, probably it doesn't matter, because I remember reading somewhere where T.S. Eliot said, before an artist becomes universal, he must first become local. We are talking about Things Fall Apart, for example. It's a very, very local novel, written in a very local context, in a very small village, but it's more like a universal book now when we talk about it. I remember reading...
Sorry, please. Sorry, but what's the question?
Yeah, the question, yes. I know I'm coming. I'm just... I'm talking about based on what we are discussing here. We said some of what validated the novels were the reviews and all that. I don't think those were what really validated the novel.
Not validated, we didn't use the term.
No, I heard something like, because...
I'm so sorry, man. What's the question?
The question is, why does it have to matter, as in the African writer, debate on African writer, was really the problem there? Because the best novels we know are local novels today. Even Anna Karenina is a local novel, Things Fall Apart is a local novel. It's just that the human condition rhymes. So why?
No. Thank you so much.
Why is it?
Sure. So your question is, why is there contention around the label of an African writer? Noted. Second question, please. Okay, we have one in front.
Hi, my name is Khadija. My question is, what is the future of African literature? And I ask because at the beginning you discussed Ngugi, and I know he has a big philosophy about African writers writing in African languages.
Sure. So we have another question on what is the future of African literature. We have one over there, actually, and then we'll take that one, and that's the end.
Hello, my name is Norma. As regards being defined as African or Nigerian in our literature, what are your thoughts on language usage, on italicizing or othering our mother tongue tones while writing primarily in Western languages?
Sure. So that ties into Khadija's question. Okay, great. We have one over there at the back, black hat. I mean, I'm the only one allowed to wear hats to events, so I don't know what is going on. So maybe at the end of this panel, we will all wrestle. Yes, we will all wrestle. There's only one hat allowed in Lagos, please.
So my question is, there's a current surge of African and black artists that's been happening within the past couple of years. I guess the question I have is, how likely is this to be sustainable as opposed to just being a flash in the pan? Because this has happened before, where the interest in black or African artists has come, and then it's suddenly just gone into the background. How likely is this sort of rise to continue and not fade again?
All right, sure. Thank you so much. So that's all our questions. So the first question was, why is there contention on the label of an African writer?
I've spoken a little bit about that,
sure.
About why it's problematic, because it depends on who uses it, who calls you an African writer. Sometimes it's done to put you in a ghetto, so that's why it becomes a problem. You said that all writings are local, you mentioned some writers who are local. All writing, is local. Because writings are set in a locale, so that makes them local. You're writing from where you come from. It's the characters, the story that transcend the locale itself. And that's why I think Things Fall Apart is so international in that sense, and people who are non-African can read it and see themselves in it. So all good books try to show human beings, not just as Africans or Europeans, but as a father or a mother. And if you do that, or a brother or a sister, or a farmer or whatever, or a jerk, And if you can see that, you can relate to it, and then it transcends that particular place where the person lives. It becomes universal because you're just portraying a human being.
All right, thank you so much.
All these complexities. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much. So we had another question. on the future. Yes, on the future of African literature. So there are two, it's a similar thing, so you can actually take the tour.
But the one I want to answer is the one on writing in Western languages.
Yes, so we had one question on Ngugi and whether we think of writing is the future of African literature going to be in African languages, and then that ties into
that's true.
On whether, so I think if you're taking, you can just take it to yes.
Yeah, just really short answer because we don't have time. I think that when people say colonization is over, it happened a long time ago, we should get over it. What they don't reckon with is with the legacy of it that lives on. We're here speaking English, right? And the English we're speaking now is Nigerian English, right? Which has its own, it has its own local flavor, right? If you were to go to the UK and ask somebody for swallow, they will look at you like, what is swallow? One swallow and soup. It doesn't mean anything, right? But in Nigeria, you say swallow, people understand what you mean, right? You see Nigerian movies on Netflix, and they are, what's that term called again? Subtitling them. Because your English is local. Your English is, is something different from the English of the US or the English of the UK, right? And I think that, the gate's already open and that horse has bolted, right? I don't think it's realistic to talk about writing in African languages because even many of us who speak our own local languages very fluently cannot write in those languages, right? And then even if you were to write in those languages, who is publishing you, right? Anybody who can read Igbo, there's no Igbo, there's no...
She's working on italicizing.
Italicizing, okay. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I didn't understand that. So that's a less interesting question, but anyway, I'll answer it too.
It's house
I think
style.
it's a house style. Yeah, so some publishers want you to italicize, and then you decide, okay, am I going to and get the contract, or am I going to fight this? You have to choose your fights, right? And for some people it doesn't really matter. And I also think that the anxiety of italicizing is also something that is very unique to us. I read, you find books by Dutch writers, right? When there's a word in Dutch, it's italicized, they don't discuss it, they don't care. They're like, okay, just sort of shows the difference. It shows, okay, this is a different language that's not in English. When their books get translated, those are italicized. I don't like it because I don't like the look of it. I think it makes a book look untidy. But I don't think it should be as political as we'll understand why it's political sometimes. But I think the anxiety is mostly yours. It's not,
Because we've had that unique history.
Because we had that unique experience. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
I think it's for the sake of clarity sometimes. This word is not English, so you don't mistake it for an English. I think sometimes when it's problematic is when you have, at the end of the book, a whole glossary trying to explain all these things. That I don't like, You have to understand the book.
That one is racist.
Within...
Okay, so final question. Nnamdi, I wanted you to address the question on whether we see, this sudden interest in, black literary arts as a fad, one, and two, how do we actually make this interest sustainable? It opens up questions about community, institution building, and, sustainability.
Yeah, I think I've spoken about it earlier as regards ecosystem building. I think literature is becoming way more self-sufficient in the sense that books can be written here and grow and take on a life of its own in Africa alone without it being exposed to the West in the way it was before. So I feel in many ways, there's still a lot of progress to be made, but in many ways we are becoming way more self-sufficient. And just recognizing that I don't see it being a fad, I see it as growth, as evolution, in a way that we are becoming more robust. Like I said earlier, way more institutions, way more collaboration that is open and encouraged, and way more sharing of knowledge, sharing of resources. So I think from here, it can only keep expanding in terms of institutions, in terms of genres, in terms of what we discuss with our peers and do with language individually and collaboratively.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to this fantastic panel. I know that we had to rush the end, but please feel free to walk up to them at the end and ask them more questions. She wants you to buy books. You can do that while you can buy books while you ask her questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for being such an engaging and interesting audience. Thank you guys so much for being on the panel. Thank you.